What kind of mind conceives a tomb that doesn't merely confine, but pierces the body with cold iron from every angle? Was it punishment or theatre? The Iron Maiden, known in later centuries as the Eiserne Jungfrau, stands today as one of the most chilling icons of medieval cruelty, though its origins remain cloaked in layers of fear, myth, and selective historical preservation. This infamous device took the form of a sarcophagus, tall, narrow, and shaped vaguely like a human figure. Within its interior, iron spikes lined the door and back panel, deliberately positioned to pierce critical but non-lethal parts of the body: the eyes, the arms, the legs, and other sensitive areas. Victims were enclosed slowly, and when the doors shut, they weren't killed immediately. Instead, they were kept alive, bleeding, immobile, and in total darkness. Every breath was a struggle, every movement a renewed agony. Though often attributed to the High Middle Ages, the earliest physical models of the Iron Maiden don't appear in the historical record until the late 18th century. One of the most infamous versions, housed in Nuremberg, Germany, was likely inspired by earlier methods of torture rather than an actual medieval tool of interrogation. Nevertheless, the logic of the Iron Maiden was entirely in line with medieval punitive philosophy. Punishment not just as retribution, but as spectacle and deterrent. Chroniclers like Johann Philipp Siebenkees, writing in 1793, are often cited as the first to describe the Iron Maiden in gruesome detail, though modern historians widely believe this account was either exaggerated or apocryphal. But whether myth or adaptation, it reflected a deeper historical reality. During the Inquisition, and under regimes like that of the Holy Roman Empire, torture was institutionalized. Silence wasn't merely enforced, it was embedded into the very mechanics of pain. The Iron Maiden may never have seen widespread medieval use, but the fear it embodies is rooted in historical fact. The Church and Crown sanctioned methods that sought not only confession but total submission, achieved through instruments designed to erase the will. The rack, stretching the limits of human endurance. What happens when the human body is pulled to the brink, joint by joint, tendon by tendon, until identity itself is eclipsed by pain? The rack, known in various regions simply as the stretching frame, was not a relic of fiction, but a tool employed with chilling purpose across Europe, particularly from the late 13th century through the early modern period. This device was deceptively simple in design: a rectangular wooden frame fitted with rollers at both ends. The accused would be bound by the wrists and ankles, and the rollers, operated by a handle or windlass, would be gradually turned. With each rotation, the limbs were pulled farther apart, causing severe strain on the joints and body. Shoulders, hips, and knees were forced beyond their limits, often resulting in dislocations and lasting harm. It was not designed to kill quickly. Instead, it wore a person down incrementally, physically shattered, yet still conscious. The rack was used extensively in England during the reign of King Edward I and later under the Tudor monarchs. It was infamously housed in the Tower of London's Lower Wakefield Tower. Historical records show it was euphemistically referred to as the Duke of Exeter's daughter, named after Thomas Exeter, who reputedly introduced it to England in the early 15th century. It was used on both men and women, noble and common, though heretics and political prisoners were most often its victims. Among those who endured its torment was Guy Fawkes, conspirator in the 1605 gunpowder plot. His confession, extracted under torture, likely with the rack, transformed from an illegible scrawl to a barely readable signature. His pain spoke through ink. One of the most chilling contemporary assessments comes from the English jurist Sir Edward Coke, who remarked in 1603, "The law of England doth not allow torture, but in some cases the king's command is obeyed. The statement betrays the fragile boundary between legal principle and the brutal reality of political expedience. This wasn't mere punishment, it was extraction. The rack was reserved for when words needed to be forced from the body, when confessions had to be forged in sinew and blood. For many, the suffering outlived the session. Permanent paralysis, lifelong agony, or death by infection often followed. The Judas Cradle, a seat designed for pain. How do you compel silence and submission without spilling a drop of blood? The Judas Cradle, known in some regions as the culla di Giuda, was not a device of swift punishment. It was a tool of humiliation, degradation, and deliberate surgical torment used primarily during the late medieval and early Renaissance periods in parts of Italy and Spain. This instrument was horrifying in its simplicity. A pyramidal wooden or metal spike, mounted on a stand, was placed beneath the victim. The individual, often stripped, would be suspended by ropes and gradually lowered onto the point of the pyramid. The tip was not sharpened to penetrate, but intentionally dulled. The agony came not from impalement, but from the increasing pressure, which was focused on some of the most vulnerable parts of the human body, typically the lower abdomen or the censored regions. Victims were not dropped. They were suspended, sometimes for hours, sometimes days, hovering just above the tip, then slowly lowered until their body weight did the rest. Any attempt to shift, scream, or move only worsened the agony. It was a punishment designed to break, not to kill, though death by infection or internal injury often followed in the days after. While records of this device's specific use are sparse compared to others like the rack, mentions appear in connection to inquisitorial procedures conducted under the Spanish Inquisition, particularly during the 15th and 16th centuries. Confessions were prized, and pain was a means to that end. It was a time when moral transgression, blasphemy, or suspected heresy could be met with tools meant to purify the soul through the suffering of the flesh. Contemporary observers did not always leave direct quotes regarding the Judas Cradle, but the Malleus Maleficarum, a 1487 manual for inquisitors, laid bare the mindset of the time. Torture is justified if the accused is obdurate or the evidence strong. The machinery of religious and political interrogation was built on such justifications. The Judas Cradle is especially infamous because it added a second layer of torment, humiliation. Public nudity, exposure, and the degradation of bodily autonomy compounded the pain. It wasn't merely the body that was punished, it was the soul that was shamed. The Pear of Anguish, a grisly tool of silence. What if the very act of speaking, of confessing, resisting, or even breathing led to a pain so invasive it could only be described as anatomical cruelty? The Pear of Anguish, known in historical accounts as the choke pear or pera da tortura, was an insidious device that exploited the human body's internal vulnerability for maximum psychological and physical torment. Crafted from metal, the device resembled a pear split into segmented petals connected by a central screw mechanism. When the screw was turned, these petals would expand outward. The device was inserted, depending on the accusation, into the mouth, rectum, or censored anatomy, then slowly widened to stretch tissue far beyond natural limits. It caused intense pain, often tearing muscle and membranes. In the mouth, it could fracture the jaw or dislocate it entirely. In other regions, internal bleeding or lasting damage was a common result. Though exact records of its application are sparse and often clouded by sensationalism, it was believed to have been used by certain inquisitorial courts in the late medieval to early Renaissance periods, especially during interrogations targeting blasphemers, witches, or those accused of sodomy or illicit speech. The location of use often matched the alleged crime. Blasphemers had it inserted in the mouth, while others were tortured according to their sins, as judged by the court. While its existence is confirmed by preserved specimens in some torture museums, many modern scholars believe it was rarely used in actual judicial torture, possibly more a product of early modern imagination layered atop medieval precedent. Still, the threat of the device, whether employed or simply displayed, was enough to inspire terror. The Pear of Anguish reveals a powerful truth about the era. Silence and submission were often demanded not just through law, but through the looming threat of bodily invasion, of control exerted in the most intimate and terrifying ways. The breaking wheel, a public spectacle of suffering. What does it say about a society when execution becomes theatre, when pain is not hidden but performed before the eyes of a crowd? Few instruments of punishment better capture the brutal pageantry of medieval justice than the breaking wheel, known historically as the Catherine wheel or Maiden in German-speaking lands. This device was as much a stage as it was a tool. Used extensively across continental Europe from the 9th century through the early modern period, the breaking wheel inflicted one of the slowest and most excruciating deaths imaginable. The condemned would be tied to a large wooden wheel, sometimes laid flat on the ground, other times mounted upright. Then the executioner would swing an iron bar or hammer down onto the limbs, systematically shattering the bones while taking care to avoid major arteries. The goal was not immediate death, but maximum suffering. In some cases, the victim's body would be interwoven between the wheel's spokes after the bludgeoning, then hoisted high on a post for the public to see. Birds would peck at the corpse. Weather would slowly consume what was left. It was not just punishment, it was a message, visible for days or weeks. This is what happens to traitors, thieves, heretics and murderers. One of the most notorious recorded executions by wheel occurred in 1581 in Münster, Germany, where the criminal Peter Stump, accused of witchcraft and cannibalism, was broken on the wheel in full view of the townspeople. According to contemporary accounts, he received 37 blows, each targeted to prolong agony. It was, like many such executions, preceded by torture and followed by dismemberment. While some Christian saints were mythologized as surviving the wheel, St. Catherine of Alexandria being the most famous, after whom the device was later nicknamed, the reality was far grimmer. Breaking on the wheel was not just legal, it was codified in secular laws across the Holy Roman Empire and France. Judicial manuals even outlined where and how to strike: thighs, shins, arms, ribs, always avoiding the heart until the end. The French jurist Jean Bodin, writing in the late 16th century, called it a necessary terror ordained not by cruelty but by justice. Such was the justification, that horrific death served the higher order of stability. These tools did more than punish individuals. They revealed the boundaries of justice and the willingness of authority to cross those lines when truth, conformity, or dominance demanded it. From the iron embrace of the Maiden to the shattered limbs on the wheel, we witness not only cruelty, but the terrifying rationalization of cruelty within legal and religious systems. It is a legacy that forces us to ask, when fear becomes policy, what becomes of humanity? History is not a closed chapter, it is a mirror. These instruments of torment are long silent, yet their shadow stretches across time. They challenge us to consider how far civilization is willing to go when silence is prized over truth, when punishment replaces understanding, and when power speaks through pain. Comment below with your thoughts. Can true justice exist in any system that once relied on fear to enforce obedience? As we reflect on the horrors inflicted in the name of order, let the words of the 16th century jurist Andrea Alciato, a critic of judicial torture, be the final echo. Torture is a dangerous invention and wholly unreliable. It confounds the innocent. It does not convict the guilty.